development projects worth around $25 billion. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un left Pyongyang on Sunday on board a train with his wife Lee Seol-ju and several senior advisors, arriving in the Chinese capital the next day. That visit has now been confirmed. But it wasn't, though, until this morning, after Kim Jong-un was back in Pyongyang. The North's state media said Kim was in Beijing at the invitation of President Xi Jinping. It was his first known trip overseas as leader and his first meeting with a foreign head of state. As for what Kim and President Xi talked about, Chinese reports say Kim expressed openness to dialogue with the United States, including a summit with President Trump. He also reportedly claimed it was always North Korea's intention to denuclearize. That can happen, he said, if South Korea and the U.S. will take progressive steps in line with North Korea's, quote, acts of goodwill. Those comments from Kim, however, were not included in the North Korean report. South Korea has now also officially acknowledged the North Korean leader's surprise visit to China, and President Xi Jinping will be sending a special envoy to Seoul to brief President Moon. Our Blue House correspondent Hwang Ho-jun reports.
The Blue House has confirmed that Chinese State Councilor Yang Jiechi will visit Seoul on Thursday morning to brief South Korea on the outcome of President Xi Jinping's summit with Kim Jong-un.
Visiting South Korea tomorrow morning will be Yang Jiechi, a member of the political borough of the Central Committee of China's Communist Party and special envoy of President Xi Jinping. During his stay, he will meet with President Moon's National Security Advisor Chung Ui-yong and pay a visit to President Moon Jae-in.
Also expected to take place are discussions about the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula and various other pending issues. The Blue House said it will be similar to when President Moon's two envoys to Pyongyang and Washington briefed China about their trip earlier this month. The South Korean presidential office said President Moon was briefed about a flurry of activity involving Kim Jong-un and the Chinese leader while he was on his official visit to the UAE this week. Publicly, speculation about which high-level North Koreans were in Beijing continued until the meeting was confirmed today by the Chinese government. Publicly, speculation about which high-level North Koreans were in Beijing continued until the meeting was confirmed on Wednesday by the Chinese government. The White House said it was briefed on the meeting by China on Tuesday. The Blue House confirmed it was also briefed by the Chinese government, but refused to clarify the exact date when they learned about the trip. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
In other news, the United States says Washington and Seoul have reached a settlement on the revision of their bilateral trade pact. White House spokesperson Sarah Sanders told reporters on Tuesday that the two sides reached an agreement on amending the 6-year-old trade deal and that the details will be released soon. South Korea's trade minister has also said the allies have agreed in principle on the revisions to the FTA as well as the issue of tariffs on Korean steel. The Bank of Korea has released its revised data on the nation's GDP growth and per capita gross national income for 2017. The figures show the economy's been doing well on the back of improving exports and investment. Kim Hye-sung has the details.
South Korea's economy grew by 3.1% in 2017, with per capita gross national income, or GNI, approaching the $30,000 mark. The Bank of Korea said Wednesday that the nation's per capita GNI grew by 7.5% from 2016, marking its fastest pace of growth since 2011.
Gross national income per capita in 2017 hit $29,745. It grew mainly on the back of faster economic growth and a stronger won, as the Korean won appreciated against the US dollar by an annual average of 2.6%.
As for the nation's economic growth, the BOK's revised GDP growth reading of 3.1% is on par with its earlier estimate released in January, up from 2016's 2.9% and marking the fastest growth in 3 years. Nominal GDP, a measure of a country's economic output at current market prices, grew by 5.4% on year to over $1.6 trillion. Exports, which account for over half of Korea's GDP, grew by nearly 2% on year in 2017 on the back of strong semiconductor and machinery exports. In addition, construction and facilities investment contributed to the economic growth thanks to an increase in housing construction, with facilities investment expanding by 14.6%, marking a turnaround from the 1% contraction back in 2016. Private consumption also posted on-year growth of 2.6% in 2017. Services, however, rose at an 8-year low rate of 2.1% in 2017 due to sluggish growth in the wholesale and retail trade sectors. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
NATO has joined the US, the EU, and a host of other nations in expelling Russian diplomats in response to the nerve agent attack on a former Russian spy in Britain. Moscow continues to deny any involvement, but it seems the rest of the world is not convinced. Noah Adam reports.
NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg announced Tuesday that the alliance will expel 7 staff from the Russian mission. It will also deny pending accreditation requests for 3 others. The move will reduce the size of the Russian mission by a third, from 30 to 20. Stoltenberg said the decision would send a strong message to Moscow.
This sends a clear message to Russia that there are costs and consequences for its unacceptable and dangerous pattern of behavior. And it follows Russia's lack of constructive response to what happened in Salisbury.
NATO made a similar move 3 years ago in response to the Russian annexation of Crimea, in which it cut the number of Russian staff by half. Tuesday's move comes just a day after more than 24 countries ousted more than 100 Russian diplomats in a coordinated move over the nerve agent attack in Salisbury against Sergei Skripal and his daughter, which Moscow denies. Russia has lashed out at the mass expulsion, with Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov placing the blame on the US.
We know that this is the result of colossal pressure, colossal blackmail, which is now unfortunately the main tool of Washington on the international arena.
Russia's foreign ministry is reported to be drawing up retaliatory measures for President Vladimir Putin to consider. They would likely include tit-for-tat expulsions of foreign diplomats in Russia. Noah Adam, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines for this hour.
Pyongyang and Beijing have confirmed that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un visited China this week and met with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. They are said to have reaffirmed their relationship, but the 2 state media outlets are reporting slightly differing version of what was discussed during their meeting. Our Kwon Jung-ho has more.
After much speculation, both North Korean and Chinese state media confirmed that Kim Jong-un had visited Beijing this week. According to reports, Chinese President Xi Jinping invited Kim for a, quote, informal visit. Kim had set off from North Korea on Sunday, accompanied by his wife Ri Sol-ju and a number of senior Pyongyang officials, arriving in Beijing the next day, where he met with Xi. The two are said to have praised each other's recent accomplishments, such as Xi's re-election and Kim's efforts to make positive changes on the Korean peninsula. They also pledged to communicate and cooperate more often, stressing the importance and historical significance of their bilateral ties. However, Chinese media reports said that when Xi brought up the topic of denuclearization, Kim said that has always been the will of the regime to denuclearize and that it can be resolved if South Korea and the US take progressive steps towards North Korea's acts of goodwill. He's also said to have expressed willingness to hold summits with both leaders of South Korea and the US. But these comments were not included in the North Korean state media readouts of the meeting. Instead, they included an invitation from Kim to Xi to visit Pyongyang at a convenient time, which the Chinese president was said to have accepted with pleasure. This invite was missing from Beijing state media reports. On the evening of Kim's arrival, both reports say Xi hosted a welcoming banquet for the North Korean delegation, as well as an arts performance. Kim is also said to have toured an exhibition of the Chinese Academy of Sciences and had another luncheon with Xi on Tuesday before departing back to Pyongyang later in the evening. The meetings seem to show a reconciliation of ties between the two old allies, but the discrepancies in the reports point to the different agendas that Kim and Xi had during the visit. Kwon Jung-ho, Arirang News.
And to tell us more about Kim Jong-un's visit to Beijing, as well as President Moon's visits to Vietnam and the UAE, Professor Song Se-ryun from Kyung University joins us in the studio today. Hello, Professor.
Hello.
All right, so quite a surprise visit by North Korean leader Kim Jong-un as he traveled over to Beijing to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping. What was the main reason, you think, behind Kim's visit to China?
Well, first off, the whole development seems unexpected, but it does have a familiar kind of undertone to it. If you look at it from a positive point of view, I think that our administration wants to see it that way. All the key players are there at the table. So whatever decisions made, probably that will be the final decision, hopefully. But I think the cynical point of view still persists, and I think it's, in a way, more realistic. Over the years, North Korea's modus operandi has always been escalation first, and then easing the tension with milking economic advantages. And they managed to bring the Donald Trump agreed to come to the table sometime in May. Assuming that it happens, this is a deal situation.
Okay.
And if you look at it, what's happening in the White House, they staffed or reconstituted the cabinet with hawkish tendencies. So I think that Donald Trump will hit hard initially, trying to kind of get the other deal partner to be in the corner. Probably Kim Jong-un doesn't want to be that way. So the significance, to answer that question, is to secure some sort of white knight. Somebody to go to, the way to walk away from the table if he needs to. So this is a kind of a high degree of strategy in a deal situation. So in that sense, North Korea has put the kind of the elements in place in preparation for the deal. And at this point, it complicates things for everybody. So I would say the saga continues.
But what's interesting, though, that it was the first time that Kim Jong-un met with Chinese President Xi Jinping. And also, it was his first time going abroad since taking power back in 2011. And we heard that it was actually Mr. Xi who invited Mr. Kim to come to China to talk to him about what's happening with the upcoming summits with South Korea and North Korea, and also the one between President Trump and North Korea.
Right. According to the President Xi, he says the situation has changed. That's why he invited North Korea. The situation has indeed changed. For China, North Korea has always been a hot potato.
Right.
Their rogue behavior has always made them uneasy about it, but at the same time, they are kind of a life relationship. They call it the blood brotherhood alliances. So it was a matter of time that they will be drawn together at some point. But this time it was particularly important for China because for China, being able to control North Korean rogue behavior is one of the advantages that they had, and position themselves, that allows to position themselves that, wait, look, we're the guardian of peace here, simply by ensuring that North Korea doesn't press those nuclear buttons. But North Korea managed to bring the United States come to the table without China. So there is a real concern about the China passing, so to speak. And I think for the regional hegemony competition between the China and United States, probably it's important that China is at the table and be seen as a key player.
Now, what do you think was discussed during this meeting?
I think after that, the Chinese reporting has been pretty extensive about it, but I think the important part is that they reaffirmed their friendship and their alliances, brotherhood alliance, and they talked about the peninsula situation, and President Xi reportedly expressed the welcome for the development of dialogues and what's going on. And the Kim Jong-un said that it was a dying wish of their ancestors that this region needs to be free of nuclear. Now, I don't believe that.
Okay.
And not many people does.
There are doubts about that.
Right.
Yes.
So it might be just a rhetoric, but if we can pull out some sort of solid agreement or a situation where even without the nuclear, their security is ensured, maybe. I'm saying the small maybe could be possible.
Now, I think it was interesting that Kim Jong-un's wife, Lee Seol-ju, actually traveled with him to China. What can we make of this?
I think this is, although this is an unofficial visit, I think this shows not only just the matter of business, but being close together, like relatives getting together kind of setting. So I think it shows goodwill from the both parties that our relationship goes just beyond the business at hand.
Okay. Now, the Blue House said that it was quote-unquote positive for the North's upcoming summit with South Korea and the United States that Kim Jong-un decided to go and visit and meet with President Xi. But now China has been kind of watching everything from on the sidelines to see everything unfold. But and you talked about China passing just moments ago, but now it seems that China is standing on a very different path. So how would this all affect South Korea?
Well, it complicates things in several degrees. I think they welcome this situation in a kind of a forced way. I mean that it is true that, as I mentioned, there's a key players at the table, and everybody expressed the kind of optimistic view about it. You know, the denuclearization in the region expressed by Kim and President Xi, saying that this is a welcome development. Those are all good. In that sense, you can look at it from the optimistic point of view. But I think it complicates things for South Korea because now China is there, and if North Korea was looking at South Korea as kind of a go-to guy if the negotiation with United States falters, now they have China, so there is a real possibility of Korea passing now. So there are all kinds of different degrees of complication has arisen. I think that South Korean government realizes that having China has a positive point, but it just complicates things.
Right. I mean, like you said, there seems to be a chance of even more an intense tug of war between China and the U.S. now in regards to its countries in the Northeast Asian region. So with that in mind, then, what kind of countermeasures should South Korea government have in place?
I think that you have to kind of step back and look at what has worked over the years. I think what has worked in this situation has always been international alliance. Having China as a key player, but standing together with the sentiment that United States and Europe and other countries have about the rogue nation. That has worked. That has pressed the North Korea to this degree, although they persisted to have the nuclear weapon at their hand. I think that has to continue. If we just look at China sitting opposite side of the table, probably things will not go well. I think the diplomatic effort towards the United States and also China and having a solid position ourselves probably make or break this situation. I think we cannot really rule out the situation or possibility that this is another episode that North Korea manipulates the parties to get what they want.
So amid all these developments, we have the high-level official meeting coming up tomorrow on March 29th between the two Koreas. So anything that we can expect from there in regards to this?
I think it's, at this point, more logistics. Probably they'll agree on when to meet and how the protocols will go. I think the discussions and if you just look at what kind of agenda they set, probably we can gauge what kind of directions they are setting. I think it has to be a very significant agenda that the South Korea needs to be remain as a key position and also key player in this whole saga, and that's going to be a challenging task.
All right. Well, let's move on to President Moon Jae-in's recent visits to Vietnam and the United Arab Emirates. How would you assess President Moon's first overseas trip for the year, and what came out of them?
I think it's very positive. I think that other than the domestic matters, we have to always look to a kind of global stage, especially in the economic themes. This time around, the report says that there was some significant development in terms of commitments of both parties to elevate our relationship and to increase the trade volumes. I think that has a significance not only for the countries of Vietnam, but because the Vietnam has an important position in that region itself, the ASEAN region. So Korea's probably pivoting towards that the southern part of Asia is a positive thing. And also, the Middle East is the same thing. Middle East always played a key part economically in Korean development economically. So that region is important strategically and also because of the opportunities that present to our companies. And it seems like that has taken place. So
let's take a closer look at some of the details of the trip. I mean, Korea and Vietnam have agreed to boost their bilateral trade to $100 billion by 2020, which is 50% more than last year's total. So how important is Vietnam to Korea when it comes to trade?
Vietnam is important in several regards. One is Vietnam in and of itself, even without anything other, is a fast-growing country, and upward of 7% of GDP. It kind of reminds us of what we have gone through in several decades. So it's strategically, economically important, but at the same time, we have developed or cultivated relationship with Vietnam over the years. One example would be just like Korea has concentrated on science and technology as an engine of growth, we worked with Vietnam to do a sort of VKIST as opposed to KIST, which was a Korea Institute of Science and Technology.
Right.
And that kind of collaboration has already taken place. A lot of companies have advanced to Vietnamese projects. So I think this is not a new start, but a stepping up in a significant way so that our relationship will not confined in just developing Vietnam, but it will spill over to the regional significance.
All right, let's head over to the UAE. I mean, what happened with the secret military deal that was supposedly signed with UAE back in 2009 under the former Kim Jong-un administration? I mean, there has been controversy over that. So was that addressed in any way while President Moon was there?
I think that the way they announced their agreement indicates that scandal or the controversy is in the rear view. It seems like they've taken care of it. And besides, UAE needs a friend too because of their particular situation in a global stage. They have Saudi Arabia, but they've been, in a way, ostracized in many different situations. So I think both countries want to improve the relationship, not only security-wise, but also economically. I think that Korean industrialists that accompanied the president has made some progress, and that shows on the newspaper report. And apparently there's no secret memo or agreement this time around. So we're optimistic that it'll go well.
I think a lot of positive things came out in regards to economic cooperation with Vietnam as well as with the UAE. So.
Right. Korean presidents, for some reason, well, I guess, rather than complicated domestic matters, they were always fared better in the diplomatic and economic means. I think this has to continue, and not only the president, the whole apparatus to look to the global stage has to be strengthened.
All right. Thank you so much for your insight today.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of our program, but make sure to tune in to Arirang News for more domestic and global news updates throughout the day. Thanks for watching and goodbye.